And I just want to ask guests if you would please type in the chat your name so that we can include you in the attendance. And I'm going to go back here because a lot of people are coming in right now, so please answer these two poll questions in the middle of your screen. And then I'm going to turn it over to Marie Doerner, who has many years of experience working with learning disabled adults. She's from San Diego Community College District Continuing Education, and she's a learning disability specialist there. So welcome, Marie.
Hi, how are you? This is the second workshop that I've done on learning disabilities, and I noticed some people were asking if you had to see the first one first, but it's not really a continuation. The first workshop talked about learning disabilities in general, and today we'll be talking about some different types of learning disabilities and maybe some of the strategies that go with that. It looks like about half the people were at the first one and half are newbies. So Marion has put into the chat earlier on in the chat room was the link to the last webinar if you wanted to see that. Otherwise, you will get an email with where you can find this one later, I think.
Did we lose you, Marie?
No, I was just trying to figure out how to do the slides.
So, here. So let's go to here.
Oh, there we go. I forgot about the little arrow. So
okay.
Yeah. So as Marion said, my name is Marie Doerner, and I've been here in San Diego for a long time, since 1994, I think. And I started working with students with disabilities. When I moved to California, before that, I was an at-home mom, and then I got my teaching credential in Wisconsin to teach physics. So I taught physics, math, chemistry, those sorts of things until I started working for Landmark West School in LA, and fell in love with working with people with disabilities. When I moved to San Diego, I just started working with adults, and I found where I needed to be. So the agenda today is students with disability, who are they? And this is kind of a recap of what we did last time, just to put that out on the floor. And then we'll talk about auditory processing, dyscalculia, dyslexia, dysgraphia, executive function that goes along with learning disabilities often. And then I've tried to, as I did the research to put the PowerPoint together, I put together a list of references at the end. I don't know if we'll have time to get there, but there's some really good references out there if you wanted more information. So I guess I already said all this. My job right now, I work for the disability support programs at the community college non-credit division. So San Diego Continuing Education is all non-credit adult ed. We have 6 major campuses and many, many smaller campuses. And my job is to be a learning disability specialist and instructor for students with disabilities. I also work in our accelerated high school program, and as a resource teacher, really helping teachers and students just survive in that environment and do well. And it's been really excited. I was very nervous about starting an accelerated high school program. I was the chief whiner to say, how are our students going to make it? It's going to be really fast and hard. But as usual, the students just pull through and are super amazing. About 30% of the students in our courses are identified DSPS, and their pass rate is 80%, which is the same as the regular students. So it's really exciting work that we do. You already answered the question. Most of the people that answer the poll are teachers, and we have an administrator and a counselor, and about half of the people attended the first workshop. Students with disabilities are volunteers into our programs. They're entitled to confidentiality. That said, they are not immune from behavior expectations. At our school, our behavior policy is called 3100, and our policy is 3100, and so as soon as a teacher starts talking behavior, they go, this is not a disability item. So it's not, it's our program is called DSPS, Disability Support Programs and Services. The law is just changed in October 2015. They put in a new law to change the names of the categories of people with disabilities. So these are the new names. So the community colleges will all use these names as of July 1st, I think. So besides learning disabilities, there are many other disabilities that your students will come to you with. Physical disabilities, deaf and hard of hearing, blind, low vision, learning disabilities, acquired brain injury, other health conditions, ADHD. We used to have a disability called developmentally delayed learner, and the new name is intellectual disability, autism spectrum, and mental health disabilities. So they're all in your classrooms, and each one has their own identities, I guess. Students with learning disabilities, since this workshop is called Classroom Strategies for Learning Disabilities, are average to above average people as far as their intelligence goes, with a statistically significant processing, or so there's something in their brain that makes it difficult. I usually tell them that there's one part of their brain that's just not working up to standard, where other parts of their brain is just working, humming along nicely, and so one minute they seem like a normal, ordinary, everyday person, and then the glitch shows up. So either they have a processing disorder, or the newest thing for learning disabilities for the adults now is the aptitude achievement gap. We always had the aptitude achievement gap, but we were requiring both a processing deficit and aptitude achievement gap. And the aptitude achievement means, compared to how intelligent a student is, their schoolwork is just not level with that. It's significantly lower. The problems are not, the problems are also not due to other disabilities, like the one I showed on the slide before, or due to educational deprivation. So people who have been out of school for a long time or missed a lot of school, we have to really sort of dissect the problem to try and figure out, is it that they never went to school, or is this really something that is a disability, which takes quite a long time. So the first type of learning disability that I was going to talk about today was auditory processing. People with auditory processing deficits have trouble recognizing subtle differences between sounds and words. It is not a hearing problem. They can hear just fine, although some of the research I was looking at was saying that depending on the hearing tests that you do, there are some hearing tests that can start to discern whether it's an auditory processing disorder. It's actually the way the sound goes into the person's ears correctly. It's just that the brain then cannot figure out what did it hear. I started trying to collect some anecdotes from my class as far as what that would look like. We had one where I was talking about tidal basins, and going to tidal pools, and one of the students started talking about what my name was and what my title was. So it was really hearing the difference between title, Mr. or Mrs., and the tidal pools. Yesterday in a meeting, we were in a hiring process, and we were trying to find out how long before we would know if this person was hired, and someone said, oh, 4 to 6 weeks. And one of the people just screamed, why would it take 46 weeks? So it's just those subtle sounds where your brain's trying to pick it up, your ears hear it, but can't really figure out what it is. This is a lot worse in noisy places. Generally, our auditory processing decreases as we get older. I think as we're older, it's called cocktail party syndrome, and it makes it really difficult when you're in a cocktail party to know what anyone's saying. You have to sort of go out on the balcony. It can cause difficulty in social situations. A lot of people with auditory processing can get really annoyed with teachers because they think a teacher said one thing when the teacher did not say that. They just misinterpreted what the person was saying. And it can cause difficulty in the classroom when answering questions, especially with spelling. And sometimes, I think on the next slide, I talk about it as well, that the person may process thoughts really slowly. And if you're going too fast in a lecture or in the classroom, the student starts really having trouble keeping up because their brain is just trying to process your speech, and it goes too slowly to keep up with the general drift of the conversation. Some students with auditory processing compensate by they're able to remember pictures and procedures well, but when it comes to the auditory language-based information, it gets really frustrating. Karen asked if these students begin tuning out, and absolutely. It's a lot of energy to stay focused and really listen and to stay focused. And I put here that they say what a lot, and usually it's not exactly what a lot, but I know a lot of teachers get really annoyed when you have to repeat. And it's really hard to tell the difference whether they tuned out because they just lost their attention or they're on the phone. And then how do we help students get their focus back?
Marie, a couple of people are asking about students who are noise sensitive and get anxious when there's a lot of noise. How do you deal with that?
Let me look at the next slide. What I tried to do was set this up so that we had how would you notice it, what are the symptoms, and then what are the strategies. I think really noise sensitive people, I would think about where in the classroom, if you think about the acoustics of a classroom, where could they sit in the classroom that is quieter. Some people like sitting in the back because they can see everyone and the sound from other people goes forwards. I talk to those people about the disadvantages of sitting in the back and how being right in front of the teacher can help. I don't particularly have a quiet classroom myself, so I like students being really interactive and talking a lot, but I know there needs to be time in the day where the classroom is really quiet, and especially for taking tests, putting something in your ears to those noise dampening earplugs can be helpful if it's for quiet time. And the other thing is really, if you've got a student who really is noise sensitive, is really work with the class to really bring the volume down. So some of the strategies that I've used with auditory processing strategies is really show rather than explain. And then multisensory, so the more that they can see it and hear it and do it, that will help as well. The other thing is to check for understanding, and sometimes choral responses will get you to do that. And once you start to target a certain person that's having the issues, you can really have ways of checking with them without working with them and not embarrassing them in front of everybody, but really working to make sure that they're moving along at the right speed, so that you can allow for processing time. The last one, I kind of laughed when I put it in there because it's give clues about when about to give directions or when giving important information. And I think for some students pick that up right away. You say, oh, this is going to be on the test. This is really important. Don't forget this. And then other people, you really have to handhold and help them learn that if you say that, they need to make a note of it. So my question to you, what strategies have you used with students who have difficulty with auditory processing? And you can
I'm switching you over to that chat box now.
While I'm talking, it's really hard to read your comments and answer it. I'll do the best I can with it. But this is a good time for you to, what are some things that you use and that have been successful for auditory processing? I think a lot of students with English as a second language also are similar to people with auditory processing, because the sounds in different languages are produced in different ways, and your ears sort of haven't attuned to that type of thing. I spent a while trying to work on Mandarin, and just learning to listen to the tones was really hard for me. The taking notes is a really good topic. We have, in the DSPS office, we have an accommodations sheet for students. So they come to their counselor and they get their, okay, my accommodation is extra time on tests. So one of the things would be to have a note taker. Or some way for the student to get the notes. If they can't take notes quick enough, or if they can't think through quick enough, then taking notes would be helpful. Some really good ideas are going out there. I'll give you another few seconds and then we will move on. Yeah, I think if you have a hearing problem, the English is really difficult. Especially, I had some notes, especially if you hear the N's, you'll see it in their spelling, they'll spell and, A-N, instead of A-N-D. So the ends of the words, that's one tip for you, that they have auditory processing. Sometimes it's the middles of the words, because they'll hear the schwa all the time instead of actually hearing whatever someone is actually using. Marion, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
When the recording of the webinar comes up, are all the chat rooms
Yes.
also there? Oh, so that's cool. So I can go back and read it later when I have time. And other people can go back and see all the good ideas. Okay, well, we'll go forward. The next one is Dyscalculia. This Dyscalculia seems to be changing since when I first became a learning disability specialist. The researchers were saying, well, there's hardly anyone got dyscalculia. Most of the people who have problems in math is to do with anxiety, that for some reason they'll get very anxious right at the beginning of learning math, or somewhere around 2nd or 3rd grade. They'll get in trouble, and then they'll become very anxious about it, and it's the anxiety stopping the dyscalculia. But that's not really what is being said today. As more and more brain research happens, we realize that all of these learning disabilities are really rooted in the different parts of the brain. And sometimes I say to students, it's like you have a little scar in the brain, or it's a little glitch that your family is just producing over and over again. And so that one part of the brain is not acting the same as other people's brains, and so it makes it more difficult to keep focusing and keep learning something. So with math disabilities, a student seems to be successful at other academic tasks, but struggles in basic math skills. We think it's rooted in the parietal lobe, where people are not able to judge quantity. For some students, it's linking the number symbols with the number cents. So they'll see the 52, but they haven't really got a good idea of what 52 is. Like I said, it's really tough to diagnose, and it comes with a lot of anxiety. I find that people with dyscalculia often are trying to memorize procedures without really knowing why they're doing the math, and sometimes they get annoyed when I focus on the why of why we're doing the math a certain way, or what is it supposed to be, because they're too busy trying to memorize the procedure and they just want to say, tell me how to do it and I'll just follow along. The problem with that is it really stresses the memory, and then if your memory fails, you've got nothing back to fall back on because you didn't really know why you were doing this. Some people, the other thing with math is a lot of procedure in math, like long division. You have to divide, then you multiply, then you subtract, then you bring down and repeat those 4 steps over and over again. For some students, they need to see the step-by-step. Others need to see the whole completed problem and get the whole big picture before they can actually tackle the little steps. That's also true with essays and any project. So there's always those students that need to see the full project before they can start working on the little pieces. People with dyscalculia may often have trouble with spatial orientation, where things are in space, and those folks have a lot of trouble with geometry. Dyscalculia is so interesting because we start math usually with arithmetic, add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Once we have that, we do fractions, decimals, percents, and then to algebra. Some people with dyscalculia are fine with algebra because there's nothing wrong with their thinking, and they can think through algebraic problems, and they like that. And they think, oh, math has suddenly turned good for me. I couldn't remember all the procedures for the lower level math, but now the algebra is okay. And then they hit geometry with all the spatial features, and it all drives them crazy again. Students with dyscalculia may also have trouble transitioning from one task to another, have poor sense of direction, lose things. We talked about last time that sense of time, especially people with ADHD have a lot of trouble with time and where am I in time. Dyscalculia strategies would be use concrete materials and activities. I try, even if we're doing 35 times 14, come up with an answer and say, what could you buy for that much money? And try and cement numbers into their lives, and so that it's not as abstract an idea. Teach more than one way to solve a problem. I think another complicated thing is that the way I teach math may not be the way they learn to the math, and then they get really confused between the two different methods, wherein other people really benefit a lot from having more than one way to solve a problem. Trying to understand the student's errors, and don't just settle for wrong. Sometimes it's just the misplacement of a plus or minus. Sometimes they're doing the whole thing incorrectly. So it's really analysis of student error where you can. Again, I said limit speech, show many examples, show but don't tell so much. Build on existing knowledge, allow use of calculators, and a lot of people with learning disabilities do, one of their accommodations might be to use a calculator, although using a calculator can be a whole nother set of problems, because learning how to use a calculator and being accurate on that calculator and pushing the right buttons can be a whole nother ball of wax, really. And working with the anxiety just when coming up to really helping students deal with the anxiety, and for them to know it's normal to be anxious. I talk a lot about, I'm going to open this up to what kinds of strategies do you use with students in math, and I'll just keep talking as well. So teaching math two or three ways is really good, and a lot of schools, I know when my kids were in school, their standardized testing was requiring them to show two or three ways to solve problems. I think it's also culturally fun. I am born in Australia, and when we do division, when we did division, my sister's a teacher there now. She said they've straightened everything up now. But the division we did upside down compared to the way Americans do it. And I know some of my African students have had really interesting ways to do different types of math. So people with visual spatial weaknesses, graph paper is really good. Even regular lined paper turned sideways will help students line up the paper if that's what the problem is. Absolutely different. Each math here in this country is really a whole different language. So you might do well with algebra and not so well in geometry. Okay, I am going to Laura. Hi, Laura. Laura is typing, so I'll give you a couple of seconds. Well, actually, you're typing in the general chat, so that will stay with us. So the next one is dyslexia, and I think for most people, when you talk about learning disability, dyslexia is the first thing that comes to your mind. Students are often articulate, intelligent, but when they come to read, it's like, oh, what happened? These students may not test well. They, again, have trouble with sustained attention. I think the same as with auditory processing and dyslexia. It takes so long to get the brain moving, and a lot of the research is showing that instead of just a few parts of your brain firing to get the job done, a lot of the brain is just disorganized, and a lot of different parts of the brain are firing, so it's really hard to keep up the pace and stay focused. Dyslexia means trouble with reading, and that trouble could come in actually 4 different ways. If you've done the, I think CALPRO has reading trainings. Either the trouble is with reading the words, which means it could be a decoding problem. Complaints they have to read and reread many times. It could be that they're struggling with their vocabulary or their comprehension, or that they're reading so slowly that they can't get the comprehension to kick in. So it really hurts. The spelling could either be phonetic, or you can see that the student is just completely guessing at how to spell. Dyslexia strategies. I tell students that English is crazy, that we are a mutant language, that we're a language of war, that we've adopted words from the Vikings, from French, from German, from you name the country, and we've stolen words from there. And so our spelling rules really come from all over the world, which makes it a little bit different. But if you learn the basic spelling rules, you will get you get about 80% of your words right, and spell check can really help you in that way. My son is an ESL teacher, and he just says all the research says read. We spend a lot of time talking about reading, and so really giving people the right amount of reading. The biggest problem with that is reading at your level, and especially when you've got a full class of people, it's hard to adjust and get students to read at their level. Set goals and find answers that meet those goals. Provide pictures, diagrams, graphic organizers so that the language can be shown in other ways, and the connections within the writing can be shown. A lot of my students are using their phone to spell, so they'll pull out their phone and say hypochondriac, and the phone, then up on the phone will come the word hypochondriac, and they'll be able to spell. So that really helps them. We also have, there's a lot of different audio books, and there's different services that you can get. So we have a service which is Firefly by Kurzweil. It's the Kurzweil system that our school pays for, and the computer will then read all the students' books to them. I have a guy in high school who came into us hardly reading at all, and he does all of his work using the audio books, and he's just passing all his classes and doing amazing. And he's learning to spell. He's working with the library reading program as well, so he is learning to spell as well. Providing the strips to follow when reading. One of the problems for people with reading is if their eyes are not tracking correctly, and it's the old way that we used to put our finger across and use our finger to follow the words. You could just put a whole piece of paper over the line you're reading, and that will help as well. I can see people are already putting ideas up for what can you do to address learning disabilities and dyslexia particularly.
I'm just going to encourage everyone to put your ideas in the big box next to the slides that's labeled dyslexia, so we'll have them separated out in the chat. Thanks.
The plastic over the paper, oh, I should have written it down before. It used to be called Erlen and Erlen Lens. It has a new name now, where they say it's a different, that their eyes are not able to bend the light correctly, and so they can go and get assessed for using colored plastic overlays. It's expensive, and you have to be assessed to figure out what color. If you find out what color it is, you can have your glasses made that color and forget about the overlays, which is pretty cool. I have some coworkers who swear by it. But as you change in life, as your eyes change, so your colors change. So you have to have it assessed every now and again. I think it's called scotropic hypersensitivity, or the next category that I was going to talk about was dysgraphia. Messy writing, the students seem uncoordinated. they seem either to go very slowly and carefully or just sloppy and fast. My 25-year-old has always been very fast and incredibly sloppy, and when he was doing his SATs, it was like, how is anyone going to be able to read his writing? But it's really a fine motor problem. Dysgraphia can also have problems with the processing system involved with sequencing. So spelling can be difficult. Instead of G-I-R-L, you'll get the G-R-I-L. It's the hand and brain are not working together, and so the letters will get jumbled up. These students often can articulate stories and answers, but they can't get them on paper. So much energy is spent on the writing and the spelling that the learning is shortchanged, and the content of their writing, they'll often choose easier words rather than try and spell a more difficult word. Next. The strategies really are to practice and really work towards fluency. What I really, someone was writing about relevant goals for adults, and really the coolest thing for me with adults is you can talk about automaticity, you can talk about fluency, and help them set goals for themselves around where is the problem, how can we work with it, and then talk about how do you read enough so that the words start automatically coming, and so that you can read faster, and you can practice that. And it gives a little bit more support to students because they're frustrated that they're reading over and over, because it gives them the reason why they're reading over and over. Students often have missed out on or didn't hear how to write a paragraph, so direct instruction for paragraph writing and lots of practice and immediate feedback. And then there are strategies like POWER, which stands for plan, organize, write, edit, and revise. If you have a writing time and a writing place, really, I emphasize students just write it down to start with, and then later you come to edit, and then really talk about revising without rewriting. Revise does not mean rewrite. A lot of students, when they revise, just throw everything out and start over, and it's like, well, that's defeating the point.
Marie.
Pre-organization strategies would be really thinking about before you start writing. Especially if you're writing an essay. I'm showing you my hand right now. I should have used that as a picture. Is really to think about what's your thesis statement, what if you're writing an essay or a paragraph, what are the 3 main points that you're going to be talking about, and at that point you might come up with words that you need to spell before you start writing. So when you're writing, you already know kind of where the story will take you, rather than students just starting to write and then sort of just writing the way we talk, and then once the work is down, it's all in the wrong order. I don't know if that helps. I love writing frames. I think they're really fun, and right, and modeled writing together with the class. There are also software, speech-to-text software. These are actually quite cheaper. The Kurzweil that we talked about earlier is really an expensive program. Dragon, Naturally Speaking, is a speech-to-text software, and where a student can talk and the computer writes it down. It takes a while for the computer to learn the individual voice, but I think it's just like $100 or something that you can buy it at Staples. The big problem for the Dragon is that the student needs a really quiet place to work, and most of our classrooms don't have a super quiet place where they can write, because as soon as anyone drops a pencil or makes any kind of noise, that will be picked up by the program. Typing is a really big help for a lot of students with dysgraphia, but spell checkers really mess things up, and you really need to have a human checking after the spell check. Yes, it's just Dragon, like Gragon, and it's Dragon Naturally Speaking, I think. They used to be called Dragon Dictates, but then they changed it. Another thing that the colleges have had for a long time is just to have a note taker. We've had no money for note takers exactly, but what we do have is carbon paper. So we have a lot of sheets of carbon paper, so if someone in the class could take notes, then the student with the dysgraphia would get the copy. I've also just had someone take notes and then made photocopy. If you've got a photocopy nearby, you can just make copies and give it to the student or post them online. The voice recorder also works well. The only thing with the voice recorder is that you have to go back and listen to it again, which is well, it's a problem with any study, is learning that you have to go back and reorganize and study. I've had people take pictures of their notes a lot these days, and I really encourage students to use their smartphones to do that. I've also had a visually impaired person who took notes, took photos of the board, and then they could enlarge it as they enlarged the picture. So that was really interesting. But yeah, no teacher, don't erase the board. I have to take picture of it first. I've also had students send me their math homework as a picture and say, I'm really stuck on this problem. How can you help me? It's just really trying to figure out how often you can respond to students and to make sure your boundaries are in place. Right, and actually taking notes is one of those multisensory ways of teaching. The handwriting, there's a few studies out right now that handwriting notes actually helps you retain it better than typing. But whatever works. The last major category that I'm going to talk about today, we've only got about 10 minutes left, is executive function. It really is the front part of your brain. It takes charge of impulse control and emotional control, flexible thinking. Some of the students really have a hard time with flexible thinking. When a teacher changes something, oh, instead of doing all the 10 problems on this page, I only want you to do 3. You think you're being nice to the student by giving them three problems, and it's really hard for them to adjust that to the change. Working memory problems. And I have 2 ways of issues with working memory, and that is some people can remember for the moment, and in the 10 minutes of you doing the math and the 10 minutes of doing the practice in class is just not enough to cement it into their long-term memory. So when they get home, they said, I could do it fine in class, but now I can't do it. It's a working memory issue sometimes. With executive functioning, it's really teaching students to monitor themselves. And again, because we have adults, it's, are you still focusing, or are you thinking about the laundry and cleaning your house or going shopping after school? Helping students to plan and prioritize. Some students with executive function seem really lazy, and what the problem is that they don't know where to start, and so it's the initiation that's the problem. And students with executive function problems have a lot of problems with organization. They may end up coming to school with nothing, or they come to school with the folders that are super full of 6 years worth of papers, and it's really impossible for them to find anything. The executive functioning, I tell students that I have to be, that they have to be their own mom, that's what executive function is all about. They need to figure out that step-by-step approach. I have a student who is always late back from break. So now he sets a timer to go to break, and so now he comes back on time. Having visual schedules and visual reminders helps, along with written directions. If you have time in class to spend some time organizing, that can also help as well. Planning transition times. And this is something that I think as a teacher, you really need to figure out, am I having trouble with the transition times, and then how do I plan around them? For me, I have certain times during the day. So my class starts at 8:30. We usually talk about the brain and studying and life until from 8:30 till 9. At 9, they get their spelling words, or we're working from mega words. And then they write sentences till 9:30. So it's a really regimented, structured day, and they seem to really appreciate that. For people with executive function problems, creating to-do lists, breaking down assignments into chunks, and really for them not to take on more than 1 or 2 items. Using a calendar and scheduling a clean or organized day. I think I said that. My goal was to talk about all of these different disabilities, and within an hour, I really can't cover all of it. So I hope this has been useful. We've got about 5 minutes left, but today I talked about auditory processing, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia. There's also a lot of information out there about language processing disorders and nonverbal learning disabilities, which sometimes goes hand in hand with autism, and visual perceptual and visual motor deficits. So it's a visual sort of problem. Other types of disabilities that are not exactly, they can be hand in hand with learning disabilities, but not always, are attention deficit and hyperactivity, which is a medical diagnosis. And it comes really, the 2 types would be the person that can't sit still and needs to stand up in the back of your classroom, or needs to go to the bathroom a couple of times a day, as long as they come back really quickly. The dyspraxia and executive functioning, and we talked about executive functioning. I think we could do a whole workshop on memory. Our acquired brain injury classes have whole classes just on how do you improve your memory, what are memory strategies that you could use, and how do you use your memory more efficiently. Any questions or thoughts about where do we go from here? Has this been useful? I think as useful as listening to me is the wonderful people in the audience giving their strategies. So I really agree that the routine is really important. For tutoring a stroke victim, this kind of looking at this whole workshop, you would be really looking at where did the stroke happen, which parts of the brain were affected. We have, here in San Diego, we have 3 brain injury programs. One is for mild brain injuries, one is for people whose speaking was affected, and one that's more in depth for more involved brain injuries. And I think it's patience. It's also deciding where was I before and who am I now, because it's almost like that you have a 2 sides to it. You have to have that before my stroke and after the stroke. I think with mental illness, it's the same, and really the hardest thing for me with students with mental health issues is that they are regularly seeing their doctor, and that the medications are, they're taking the medications, and that the medications that are appropriate. And the more feedback you can give the student in a polite way, the better. I put up here, we have about 1 minute left, I think. So you'll see at the end, I tried to label the references with the parts of the workshop, but that, so I put them together. So there's a couple of, there's one reference for auditory processing. The CALPRO has other learning disability workshops where it's live and longer. This Dyscalculia, Dysgraphia, executive function. So I actually, for all of the disabilities that I had mentioned here today, I put links in there for you. There's a lot of good information out there. You do have to watch out for some of the less than stellar pages, but it's still really, I hope they're useful. The DSPS solutions, the very first one is a group of people who are advising the community colleges, disabilities programs on what you can do to help people with disabilities. So it's a really good website to just look around and look at the different kinds of disabilities and what the laws are and what some people can do about it. Marion, is our time up?
Our time is exactly up. So thank you very much, Marie, for lots of information, lots of strategies, and lots of references. Hope you all had a chance to download the slides. If you didn't, they will be on the website with the recording when it's posted. When we so if you remember how to go up to your communication icon and give applause, let's give Marie a round of applause. She gave us a lot to think about today. Thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
And so I'm going to close the meeting now, And when I do that, you're going to be taken to another web page, which is the evaluation form for the webinar, and we really appreciate your feedback. I think we'd like to do these again sometime in the future, so we'd really appreciate your thoughts about what you liked and any thoughts about how to make this better. Thank you very much. You guys all had wonderful ideas, and you were so participatory, so thank you for that, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.